An arrogant millionaire begins to frequent a forgotten cafe. The waitresses cannot stand his gaze. But when the manager returns from mourning, she says, "Let me take care of him." If you love stories and romance, watch until the end, you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you listen to this beautiful story. We continue. The salt-laden wind of sea breeze carried more than the scent of the ocean. It brought with it the secrets of a coastal town that progress had forgotten, where wooden houses stood against time like proud scars on the landscape. There, among cobblestone, streets and yards enclosed by bougainvillea, the Blue Dawn Cafe rose like a beacon of memories, its light blue peeling walls telling stories that few dared to hear. Sarah Morgan pushed open the frosted glass door for the first time in 6 months, and the bronze bell announced her arrival with a melancholy chime. The familiar aroma of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the salty smell of the ocean hit her like a painful embrace. Each piece of dark wooden furniture, each hanging lamp, each decorative tile on the wall seemed to whisper her mother's name. Dawn, who had passed away 3 weeks ago, taking with her not just a life, but all the secrets she had mumbled in delirium during the last months of her coma. The waitresses gathered around her like startled birds. Marianne, the youngest at just 17 with eyes as big as saucers, was the first to speak, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're back. We didn't know what to do with him anymore." She pointed discreetly toward the back of the room, where a solitary figure occupied the most isolated table, strategically positioned with his back to the entrance and facing the sea through a window framed by faded linen curtains. Eric Valentino didn't look up when she entered. His black leather-gloved hands handled a white porcelain cup with a surgeon's precision, and his dark glasses remained fixed on the laptop open before him, even under the soft golden light of late afternoon. It was as if the world around him was merely a dispensable backdrop for whatever performance he was putting on with himself. "He showed up last week," continued Marianne, lowering her voice even more. "He ordered a special coffee from those imported beans your mother kept for special occasions. When Carla brought it, he said it was too bitter, returned it untouched. The next day, he ordered a double espresso, no sugar. He returned that too, said it was too weak. Then he started ordering different preparations every day, as if he was testing our competence or something. Betty, the most experienced waitress, a woman in her 40s who had worked at the cafe since before Sarah was born, approached carrying an empty tray. Her brown eyes carried that silent wisdom of someone who observes more than she speaks. "It's not just that, girl," she said, adjusting the apron embroidered with the cafe's logo. "He takes notes in a little notebook, names, times, how we behave, and he has strange questions too. Wants to know about the history of this place, about your family, about former patrons. Seems like he's investigating something." Sarah absorbed every word while observing the mysterious man. There was something familiar about that rigid posture, that controlled way of occupying space, as if each movement was calculated to create maximum impact with minimal exposure. It was the kind of presence that sucked the oxygen from the room, transforming conversations into murmurs and laughter into contained sighs. "How much does he pay?" she asked, taking off her wool coat and hanging it on the carved wooden coat rack that her grandfather had made decades ago. "That's the problem," answered Carla, the third waitress, a brunette with curly hair who normally radiated energy but now seemed subdued. "He pays very well, generous tips always in cash, but it's as if he's buying our submission along with the coffee, and we can't relax around him. It's like he sees through us, you know, like he knows things even we don't know ourselves." Sarah tied the apron around her waist, an automatic gesture that reconnected her with years of work in this place, with the routine that had been interrupted by her mother's illness, and then by death. Grief still weighed on her shoulders like an invisible cloak, but there was something else now, a dangerous curiosity that was beginning to awaken in her chest. "Let me handle him," she said, her firm voice carrying echoes of the authority she had inherited from her mother. "You can take care of the other tables." As she walked toward the back of the room, Sarah could feel the employee's eyes glued to her back. Each step on the waxed wooden floor echoed in the tense silence that had settled in the environment. The man didn't react to her approach, continued typing on his laptop with precise mechanical movements. She stopped beside the table, waited a few seconds, and when he showed no acknowledgement of her presence, pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, crossing her arms on the polished wooden table. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. Eric finally looked up, and even through the dark glasses, Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze. There was something disturbing about that silent analysis, as if he were cataloguing every detail of her appearance, every nuance of her expression, every possible vulnerability. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice low and controlled, with an accent that wasn't from Seabreeze, perhaps from the Midwest or Chicago. "I'm sorry for the loss of your mother." The phrase caught her off guard. How did he know about Dawn's death? The news had circulated around the town, of course, but a stranger from outside shouldn't have had access to such personal information so easily. "Thank you," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I heard you've been a demanding customer." A smile almost imperceptible curved his lips but didn't reach his eyes. "I merely have specific standards. I hope that's not a problem." "No," she answered, leaning slightly forward, "but arrogance costs double the tip here." Eric's smile widened just a fraction, but it was enough for Sarah to realize she had hit a sensitive point. He closed the laptop with a deliberate movement and removed his dark glasses, revealing eyes of such an intense blue that they seemed to contain pieces of the ocean itself that stretched beyond the window. They were beautiful eyes, but they carried a coldness that made the air around the table feel denser. "Interesting," he murmured, interlacing his gloved fingers on the table. "It's been a long time since someone has spoken to me like that." "Maybe. You haven't been talking to the right people," Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact. She had learned from her mother that backing down from intimidation was the first step to losing any negotiation, and this definitely seemed like a negotiation, even if she didn't know exactly of what. "And what kind of person would you be, Sarah?" "Morgan?" The way he pronounced her full name sent a chill down her spine. Again, information he shouldn't have. "The kind who isn't impressed by cheap psychological games," she answered, deciding to attack instead of defend. "The kind who inherited this place from her mother and doesn't intend to let any customer, no matter how rich, turn my cafe into a personal battleground." Eric leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made Sarah feel like a rare specimen under a microscope. The silence stretched between them, charged with an electric tension that seemed to make the air vibrate. From across the room she could feel the nervous glances of the waitresses, but she forced herself to keep focus on the man in front of her. "You're right," he said finally. "I haven't been a model customer. Perhaps I've been testing boundaries. Unnecessarily." "Testing boundaries or looking for something specific?" Sarah asked, tilting her head. "Because from what I've heard, your questions about the history of this place suggest more than simple curiosity." His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and Sarah knew she had hit the mark. There was something behind his presence in Seabreeze, something that went far beyond a simple need for quality coffee. "Perhaps I'm just a man who appreciates places with history," he said, but the evasion was too transparent to convince anyone. "And perhaps I'm just a naive small-town woman," she returned with sarcasm. "But I'm not. So how about we stop dancing around the subject, and you tell me what you really want?" Eric was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming an irregular rhythm on the wooden table. When he finally spoke, his voice had acquired a different quality, deeper, more personal. "My son died 3 years ago," he said, the words coming out like shards of glass. "Food poisoning. The product came from a factory that had contracts with local distributors in this region." Sarah felt her heart speed up. The mention of a dead child touched a wound that she herself carried, but there was something more disturbing in the revelation. Her mother had worked as an accountant for several local companies over the years, including some related to food distribution. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time the compassion in her voice was genuine. "But that doesn't explain why you're here in my cafe interrogating my employees, doesn't it?" He tilted his head, studying her again. "Your mother, Dawn, worked as an accountant for Maritime Santos distributors between 1995 and 2003. the same company that supplied products to the factory responsible for my son's death. The world around Sarah seemed to slow down. She vaguely remembered her mother mentioning that job, but it had been so long ago and Dawn rarely talked about old clients. Are you suggesting that my mother had some responsibility in the death of your child? Her voice came out louder than intended, and several heads turned toward the back table. I'm not suggesting anything, Eric responded calmly. I'm just following a trail of documents and connections that brought me here. Your mother may have had access to important information about the company's practices. Sarah stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. The anger she felt was a complex mixture of indignation, pain, and something she couldn't completely name. My mother was an honest woman, she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion. If you came here to defame her after her death, you can find somewhere else to drink your coffee. Sit down, Eric said, and there was an authority in his voice that made Sarah hesitate. Please. There was something in his tone that prevented her from simply walking away. Perhaps it was the genuine pain she had detected when he mentioned his son, or perhaps it was the morbid curiosity to know more about the accusations he was making. She sat down again, but maintained a tense posture, ready to stand up at any moment. I didn't come here to defame your mother, he continued, his voice softer now. I came looking for answers, and perhaps looking for some kind of peace. Peace? Sarah repeated, skeptical. You recently lost your mother. I lost my son 3 years ago. We both know what it's like to carry that kind of pain. He paused, removing one of his gloves and running his hand through his dark hair. Sometimes finding answers is the only way to move forward. For the first time since sitting at the table, Sarah saw Eric not as an adversary or a threat, but as another human being carrying his own burden of grief and guilt. The skin of his exposed hand was pale, marked by small scars that suggested some kind of accident or physical trauma. What exactly do you want from me? She asked, her voice lower now. Access to the documents your mother may have kept from that period. Contracts, correspondence, anything that might clarify what really happened in the distribution chain. Sarah considered the request. Dawn had been meticulous with documents, storing boxes and boxes of papers in the cafe's attic, organized by year and client. It was possible that there were still records of maritime Santos distributors somewhere up there. And if I find these documents, she said slowly, what do you intend to do with them? Discover the truth, he answered simply, and perhaps find a way to get justice for my son. The intensity in his eyes when he spoke about justice made Sarah realize that she was dealing with a man who wouldn't easily give up on his goals. There was something dangerous in that determination, something that suggested he was willing to go very far to get the answers he was looking for. I'll think about your request, she said finally. But for now, if you intend to keep coming here, you'll have to behave like a normal customer. No interrogations with my employees, no creating tense atmospheres. This is a workplace, not a courtroom. Eric nodded slowly, putting his glove and dark glasses back on. I accept the terms, he said, and Sarah, thank you for listening. 3 days passed since the revealing conversation with Eric, and Sarah couldn't get him out of her head. He had kept his word, behaving like a cordial customer, ordering simple coffee and paying without creating any kind of tension. But there was something in the looks they exchanged when she served his table that made her heart speed up in a way she couldn't completely explain. On Thursday night, after all the employees had gone home and the cafe was closed, Sarah went up to the attic for the first time since her mother's death. The wooden staircase creaked under her feet, each step echoing in the silence of the old building. The smell of mold and old paper greeted her like a melancholy embrace when she pushed open the heavy door. The attic was a mausoleum of organized memories. Dawn had been obsessively methodical, and dozens of cardboard boxes labeled with years, and client names were aligned on the wooden shelves that covered 3 of the 4 walls. A single circular window let in the golden light of sunset, creating shadow patterns that danced among the stacks of documents. Sarah quickly located the boxes referring to the years 1995 to 2003, the period when her mother had worked for Maritime Santos Distributors. There were 4 heavy boxes full of contracts, invoices, correspondence, and accounting reports, handwritten in the impeccable calligraphy that she would recognize anywhere. As she flipped through the documents, a strange feeling began to grow in her chest. There was something wrong with the numbers, discrepancies that her eyes trained in administration detected instinctively, values that didn't match, listed products that didn't correspond to the invoiced quantities, dates that didn't make chronological sense. That's when she found the red folder. Unlike the other chronologically organized documents, this folder was hidden at the bottom of one of the boxes, as if it had been deliberately concealed. Inside, there was correspondence between her, mother, and someone signed only as Ia, as well as copies of documents that appeared to be alternative versions of the distributor's official reports. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was from 2002, written by her mother to the mysterious ER. I can no longer pretend I don't see what's happening. The numbers you ask me to report don't match the reality of the inventories. Children are getting sick, ER, and we know why. If you don't take action, I'll have to do what's necessary to protect innocent families. Dawn. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the letter. Her mother had discovered something serious, something involving contaminated products and a cover-up scheme. And from the tone of the correspondence, ER was directly involved in the fraud. A noise downstairs made her freeze. Footsteps on the wooden floor of the cafe, slow and deliberate. Her heart raced. She was sure she had locked the front door. She quickly put the documents back in the red folder and went down the stairs as quietly as possible. The silhouette of a man was standing in the center of the room, illuminated only by the streetlight coming through the windows. When he turned, Sarah immediately recognized the contours of Eric Valentino. "How did you get in here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice firm despite the shock. "The back door was unlocked," he answered calmly. "I saw light in the attic and thought you might need help." "Lie," she said, descending the rest of the stairs. "I always lock all the doors, and since when do you care about helping me?" Eric took a few steps toward her, and for the first time Sarah noticed how tall he was, how his presence filled the space around him. There was something different about him this time, a tension that wasn't present in their previous interactions. "Did you find anything interesting up there?" he asked, completely ignoring her accusations. "Why are you really here, Eric?" Sarah asked, hugging the red folder against her chest. "And don't come at me with stories about your son. There's something more, isn't there?" He was silent for a long moment, studying her with those intense blue eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice had acquired a harsher, more truthful quality. "My full name is Eric Valentino Rivers," he said. I was the operations director of Maritime Santos Distributors when my son died." The world around Sarah seemed to spin. The red folder slipped from her hands, and the documents scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. Eric was the man with whom her mother had corresponded, the man who was involved in the scheme that cost the lives of innocent children. "You," she whispered, instinctively backing away. "You were part of the problem." "I was," he admitted, without trying to approach her, "and it destroyed me in a way you can't imagine. When I discovered that the products I had authorized were responsible for the death of my own son." His voice broke, and Sarah saw tears in the eyes she had considered too cold to cry. "Your mother tried to warn me," he continued, "sent letters, reports, evidence that something was wrong. And I ignored it all because I was more concerned with profits and deadlines than with food safety." "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and something she couldn't name. "Because I need you to know the truth before..." "Before what?" Eric took an envelope from the inside pocket of his coat and held it out to her. "Before you discover that I secretly bought 80% of Seabreeze's commercial properties in the last 6 months," said, "including the building where Blue Dawn Cafe operates." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands and removed the documents. They were deeds, purchase contracts, legal papers that confirmed exactly what he had said. Her cafe, the family, legacy was now in the hands of the man who had ignored her mother's warnings. "Do you plan to evict me from here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," he answered. "I plan to redeem myself." How? By transforming Seabreeze into a model community for food safety, investing in every local business, creating jobs, bringing sustainable development, and using you, if you'll allow, as my main consultant. Sarah looked at the documents in her hands, then at the man in front of her. There was sincerity in his eyes, but there was also danger. He had power over her now, over her entire world, and was offering redemption as if it were a gift she should accept with gratitude. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then I'll respect your decision," he said. "But Sarah, I need you to understand. I didn't come here as your enemy. I came as someone who carries the same kind of guilt that your mother carried. She tried to do the right thing, and I didn't listen. Now I want to do the right thing, and I hope you'll listen." The silence stretched. Between them, loaded with all the secrets that had been revealed and all the decisions that still needed to be made. Outside, the ocean wind shook the palm trees, and the sound of the waves seemed to whisper promises and threats in equal measure. "I need time to process all of this," Sarah said finally. "Of course," Eric replied, walking toward the exit. "But Sarah, your mother was a brave woman. She tried to save lives when no one else was willing to speak the truth. I hope you've inherited that courage." The following days passed in a fog of tension and uncertainty. Sarah could barely sleep, tossing in bed thinking about Eric's revelation, her mother's letters, the complex web of guilt and redemption that had formed around her life. During the day, she tried to maintain normalcy in the cafe, but she noticed the concerned looks of the employees, who noticed her distraction and the way her eyes lingered on the back table whenever Eric appeared. He continued coming every day, always at the same time, always ordering the same simple coffee. But now there was a subtle difference in his presence. The gloves were still there, as were the dark glasses. But Sarah could perceive a vulnerability that didn't exist before, as if revealing the truth had cracked his carefully constructed armor. It was on a Friday morning, when the cafe was particularly busy with tourists arriving for the weekend, that she appeared. Lisa Rivers entered the Blue Dawn Cafe like an elegant storm. It was impossible not to notice her presence. Platinum blonde hair tied in an impeccable bun, tailored white suit that cost more than the cafe's monthly revenue, high-heeled shoes that echoed on the wooden floor like warning shots. She moved, with the confidence of someone who had never been denied, never been contradicted, never had to ask for something she couldn't simply take. Sarah was behind the counter, preparing a cappuccino for a retired couple, when Lisa approached. The woman was stunning, she had to admit, with aristocratic features and green eyes that seemed capable of dissecting a person with a single glance. "You must be Sarah," Lisa said, her voice carrying a refined southern accent. "I'm Lisa Rivers. I need to talk to you." "About what?" Sarah asked, delivering the cappuccino to the customer and concentrating on keeping her voice neutral. "About my adoptive brother, Eric Valentino, and about the mistake you're making by getting involved with him." The direct way Lisa went to the point caught Sarah off guard. She had expected perhaps a more subtle approach, more manipulative. But there was something in the woman's posture that suggested subtlety was for people who didn't have enough power to be direct. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah replied, but she knew the lie was transparent. Lisa smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you do. Eric has always been predictable when it comes to women. He's attracted to salvation projects, to people he considers damaged or vulnerable. Makes him feel needed, important." The words were like slaps, but Sarah forced herself to maintain her composure. "And who are you exactly to make these statements? About him?" "I'm someone who's known him for 25 years, Lisa answered, leaning against the counter with a familiarity that deeply irritated Sarah. "We grew up in the same house, studied at the same schools, built the family business, empire side by side, until the tragedy with Leo changed everything." "Leo?" Sarah repeated, the name of Eric's son leaving her mouth like a whisper. "My nephew," Lisa said, and for the first time her mask of coldness wavered slightly. "That boy was the light of our family. When he died, Eric shattered in a way I never thought possible, and since then he's been looking for ways to punish himself. to carry guilt that isn't always his to carry. Sarah observed the woman in front of her, trying to decipher if there was sincerity in her words or if it was just another layer of manipulation. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I love him," Lisa said simply. "And because I know he's using you as just another form of self-punishment. He didn't come to Seabreeze looking for redemption, Sarah. He came looking for more guilt." "You don't know me," Sarah said, irritation finally showing in her voice. "And you don't have the right to make assumptions about my relationship with him." "Relationship?" Lisa repeated, arching a perfectly defined eyebrow. "What relationship? Did he tell you he bought this property? That he has legal power to close it whenever he wants? That he can destroy your life with a simple document?" Sarah's blood froze. How did Lisa know about the deeds? "I see he didn't mention it," Lisa continued, clearly satisfied with the reaction. "Eric is like that. He approaches people under noble pretenses, but always keeps cards up his sleeve that can be used when necessary." "You're lying," Sarah said, but her voice came out less convincing than she would have. "Liked, am I?" Lisa took a smartphone from her pocket and showed the screen to Sarah. It was a text message, clearly from Eric, which said, "Acquired the cafe property. Now I can better control the situation and ensure her cooperation." The words on the screen seemed to dance before Sarah's eyes. She felt as if she had been punched in the stomach, as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. "When was this message sent?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago," Lisa replied, "on the same day he admitted to you that he had bought the town's properties." Sarah held onto the counter to keep from staggering. It all made sense now. The way Eric had revealed the information, as if it were a generous gift when in fact it was a veiled threat. He had orchestrated everything carefully, including the conversation about redemption and second chances. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, looking directly into Lisa's green eyes. "I want you to stay away from him," Lisa said. "Eric is not well, Sarah. He needs professional help, not more emotional complications. And you need to protect your business and your peace of mind. And in return? In return, I guarantee you'll maintain ownership of the cafe. I have sufficient resources to buy Eric's rights and transfer them back to you at no cost." The offer was tempting, almost impossible to refuse. Sarah could regain control of her life, rid herself of Eric's manipulation, keep the family legacy safe. But there was something about the proposal that didn't sound right, something that made her instincts scream in alert. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. "What's your real interest in all this?" Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Sarah to perceive that there were more layers to this story. "Because," Lisa said finally, "Eric and I were going to get married before Leo's death, and I intend for us to still get married. But that won't happen while he's obsessed with impossible redemption projects." The revelation fell between them like a bomb. Lisa wasn't just a concerned adoptive sister. She was an ex-fiancé who wanted to win back the man she loved and was willing to use any means necessary to eliminate the competition. "Think about my proposal," Lisa said, placing a business card on the counter. "But don't take too long to decide. Eric can be unpredictable when he feels threatened, and I'd prefer to resolve this in a civilized manner." She turned to leave, but stopped at the door and looked over her shoulder. "Oh, Sarah, just one more thing. Eric never told you about the gloves, did he? About why he never removes them?" Lisa smiled again, that cold, calculating smile. "Ask him about the fire, about what really happened the night Leo died." And with that she left, leaving Sarah alone with more questions than answers, holding a business card that seemed to burn in her fingers. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night, 3 days after Lisa's visit. Sarah had spent those days in a state of constant agitation, alternating between anger and confusion, between the desire to confront Eric and the need to keep her distance. Lisa's card remained stored in the counter drawer as a constant reminder of the impossible choices she needed to make. The wind began to blow hard around 7 in the evening, making the cafe windows vibrate in their old frames. Sarah had dismissed the employees earlier, predicting that the storm announced by meteorologists would be worse than they imagined. Now alone in the cafe, she was organizing the day's accounts while listening to the growing roar of the sea outside. The lights flickered once, then twice, before going out completely. Darkness enveloped the cafe like a heavy cloak, broken only by the lightning that illuminated the interior in ghostly flashes. Sarah fumbled until she found the emergency candles she always kept on hand, lighting them with trembling fingers. That's when someone knocked on the door. The sound was almost inaudible against the noise of the storm, but Sarah immediately recognized the rhythmic pattern: 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. It was the code that she and her mother used when it was just the two of them taking care of the cafe, a way to identify themselves on nights when they worked late. But her mother had been dead for weeks. Sarah approached the door with her heart racing, a candle in hand projecting dancing shadows on the blue walls. Through the frosted glass she could make out a tall silhouette hunched against the rain. "Who is it?" she shouted over the sound of the storm. "Eric," came the muffled response. "Please, Sarah, I need help." She hesitated. After everything Lisa had revealed after discovering the manipulations and lies, the last thing she wanted was to be alone with him on a night like this. But there was something in his voice, a vulnerability she had never heard before. She unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see him. Eric was soaked, his hair stuck to his forehead, his dress shirt transparent and clinging to his body. More disturbing still, he wasn't wearing the gloves. His hands were exposed, and even in the dim candlelight, Sarah could see the scars that covered his fingers and wrists, marks of old burns that told a story of pain he had carefully hidden. "My car broke down," he said, shivering from cold. "The roads are flooded. I can't get anywhere." Sarah looked beyond him to the storm that had transformed Seabreeze into an apocalyptic landscape. Trees bent by the wind, streets turned into rivers, the total darkness broken only by lightning that illuminated the chaos outside. Against her better judgment, she opened the door completely. "Come in," she said, "but take off those wet clothes. There are towels in the employee bathroom." Eric entered, dripping water onto the wooden floor, and Sarah locked the door behind him. In the golden candlelight he looked different, smaller somehow, more human. The masks he normally wore had been washed away by the rain, leaving only a frightened and vulnerable man. "Thank you," he said, taking off his soaked coat. "I know you have no reason to help me after—" "After lying to me?" Sarah interrupted, crossing her arms over her chest. "After manipulating me? After buying my property as if it were a game?" Eric stopped mid-movement, his shirt half unbuttoned, and looked directly at her. Without the dark glasses, his blue eyes seemed even more intense in the flickering candlelight. "Lisa was here," he said. "It wasn't a question." "She was, and she told me some very interesting things about you." Sarah took a clean towel from the cabinet and threw it to him. "Including the fact that you were engaged." "We were," he confirmed, drying his face. "Before Leo died, before everything fell apart." "And about the fire?" Sarah asked, observing how he stiffened at hearing the word. "She said I should ask you about the fire." Eric remained motionless for a long moment, the towel in his hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice came out broken, laden with such deep pain that it made Sarah's heart contract. "Leo didn't die of food poisoning," he said. "He died in a fire at our home, a fire that I caused." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the windows and distant thunder. Sarah felt the world around her change shape, as if all the pieces of a complex puzzle had rearranged themselves into a completely different picture. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "I was working late in my home office," Eric began, still not looking at her. "Leo was 3, sleeping in his room upstairs. My ex-wife Carmen had gone out to dinner with friends. I was reviewing the distributor's reports, trying to understand the discrepancies your mother had pointed out." He paused, running his hands through his wet hair. There were so many papers spread across the desk, so many documents, and I was smoking, a terrible habit I had when stressed. I left the cigarette burning in the ashtray and went to the kitchen to get coffee. When I came back was— His voice failed completely. Sarah saw tears glistening in his eyes. The office was in flames, he continued with effort. The fire spread, quickly climbing up the curtains, consuming everything. I tried to go upstairs to get Leo, but the stairs were already filled with smoke. I tried to break a window, climb up from outside, but burned my hands on the hot glass. He raised his hands, showing the scars that now made terrible sense. The firefighters arrived, but it was too late. They found Leo in his room, killed by the smoke, and I survived because I was on the ground floor when it all started. Sarah approached him slowly, each step careful, as if she were approaching a wounded animal. "Eric," she said softly, "it was an accident." "Was it?" He laughed bitterly. "I was so obsessed with business, so focused on profits and contracts, that I ignored all the warnings about contaminated products. Your mother tried to alert me about children who were getting sick, about the need to investigate suppliers. And I filed her letters away as if they were just inconvenient paperwork. That doesn't mean you caused your son's death, doesn't it?" He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so intense that Sarah had to force herself not to look. "Away. If I had paid attention to your mother's warnings, if I had investigated the factory when she suggested, maybe I wouldn't have been working late that night. Maybe I wouldn't have been smoking from nervousness. Maybe Leo would still be alive." The logic was tortuous, but Sarah understood. She herself carried similar guilt about her mother's death, about all the times she could have insisted more for her to seek medical help earlier, about all the conversations they could have had and didn't. "That's why you came to Seabreeze," she said. "You weren't looking for justice for your son, you were looking for punishment for yourself." "Maybe," he admitted, "or maybe I was looking for a way to honor his memory by doing the right thing this time." A particularly strong lightning bolt illuminated the entire cafe, followed by thunder that made the walls tremble. The storm was at its peak, and both knew he wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. "Stay," Sarah said impulsively, "until the storm passes." Eric looked at her with surprise. "After everything you've discovered about me?" "Maybe because of everything I've discovered," she replied. "We're two survivors carrying guilt that doesn't completely belong to us. Maybe it's time we stopped carrying this weight alone." The storm continued to roar outside, but inside the cafe, illuminated only by flickering candles, a world apart from reality had been created. Sarah prepared tea on a gas burner, while Eric warmed himself near one of the larger candles, still trembling occasionally. She had found a dry shirt from the employee's spare uniform, and he had put it on without protest, completely abandoning the formality he always maintained. "I need to tell you about my son too," Sarah said suddenly, placing two steaming cups on the table between them. His confession had awakened something in her, a need to share the weight she had carried for so long. Eric looked up, surprised by the unexpected revelation. "You had a son." "I did. Michael. He would be 15 now." Sarah sat across from him, wrapping her hands around the hot cup. "He died when he was 7 in a car accident I was driving." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with mutual understanding. Eric stretched his hand across the table, lightly touching her fingers. It was the first time they had touched, and his scarred skin was surprisingly soft. "What happened?" he asked gently. "It was a Sunday night. We were returning from my mother's house in Norfolk. Michael had spent the weekend with her while I organized some details of the cafe. It was raining, not as much as today, but the road was slippery." Sarah closed her eyes, reliving every second of that terrible night. "A truck lost control on the curve. I tried to swerve but skidded. The car rolled 3 times. Sarah, I came out practically unscathed. Some cuts, some bruises. Michael hit his head. He died in the hospital 2 hours later, and I couldn't even say goodbye properly because I was being medicated for shock." Tears began to stream down her face, and Eric squeezed her fingers more tightly. "That's why you understand," she continued. "That's why you recognize this guilt we carry. I wonder every day if I could have reacted faster, if I should have left earlier, if I should have insisted he wear a helmet even inside the car, anything that could have changed the outcome. And your ex-husband, Robert, couldn't handle it. We blamed each other, were cruel to each other because it was easier than facing the truth, that sometimes horrible things happen and there's no one to blame. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. He left me 6 months later, said he couldn't look at me without seeing the accident, without remembering what we lost. Where is he now? Missing, literally. He left one morning saying he was going to the bakery and never came back. He just left a letter saying he needed to start a new life, away from everything that reminded him of Michael. Eric stood up and walked around the table, kneeling beside her chair. Without saying a word, he pulled her into an embrace that she didn't know she needed. She melted against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the smell of rain, and something more masculine that made her feel protected for the first time in years. "We both carry ghosts," he murmured against her hair. "Maybe that's why we found each other." They remained like that for long minutes, two shattered people finding comfort in each other, while the storm continued its violent dance outside. When they finally separated, there was something different in the air between them, an intimacy that went beyond physical attraction. "Eric," Sarah said, touching the scars on his hand, "why did you really buy the properties in town? The truth this time." He sighed, returning to his chair. "Initially, it was revenge. I wanted to destroy everything connected to what happened with Leo. The distributor, the local suppliers, even places like this cafe where your mother worked." He paused, looking at the candle flames. "But when I arrived here and saw how Seabreeze was small, vulnerable, full of people trying to survive, I remembered what Leo used to say." "What did he say?" "He was 3, but smart for his age. He always said that when he grew up he would fix broken things. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but he said it with such conviction." Eric's voice faltered slightly. "I thought maybe I could fix broken things for him. And now, after meeting me, after this," Sarah gestured vaguely between them. "Now I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he admitted. "I came here with a plan, with clear objectives, but you changed everything." A new lightning bolt illuminated the cafe, and this time Sarah could clearly see Eric's face. The lines of pain around his eyes, the way he held his shoulders tense, the vulnerability he was trying to hide. "Lisa is right about one thing," Eric continued. "I'm not well. I have nightmares every night, wake up thinking I hear Leo calling me. I haven't been able to have a normal relationship since the divorce, because I always think I'll end up destroying any good thing that appears in my life." "And you think you'll destroy me?" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I know the risk exists, and I know you've suffered enough." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain that ran down the glass like tears. The storm was beginning to diminish slightly, but it would still be hours before it was safe to leave. "You know what my mother used to say about storms?" she asked without turning around. "What?" "That they clean the air, they carry away everything that was stagnant, everything that was weighing down the environment. After the storm, everything is fresher, cleaner. Your mother was a wise woman." "She was, and she also said that sometimes we need to go through the storm to get to the other side." Sarah turned to face him. "Maybe that's what we're doing now." Eric stood up too, walking slowly toward her. When he stopped a few inches away, Sarah could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the raindrops that still glistened in his hair. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and hoarse, "I don't want to hurt you." "I know," she answered, raising her hand to touch his face. "But maybe it's time we stop trying to protect everyone from ourselves." He closed his eyes at feeling her touch, leaning his face against her palm like a thirsty man drinking water. "If we do this," he murmured, "there's no going back." "Good," she whispered, moving closer until their bodies almost touched. "I'm tired of always looking for ways to go back." When he kissed her, it was as if all the storms of their lives had converged in that moment. There was desperation in that kiss, years of solitude and guilt being poured into each other. But there was also something softer, more hopeful, the possibility that two broken people could find a way to fix themselves together. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the cafe, surrounded by candles and dancing shadows, Eric and Sarah created their own world. a place where ghosts could rest and wounded hearts could begin to heal. Dawn arrived, filtered through the heavy clouds that still covered Seabreeze, painting the sky in greyish tones that reflected the devastation left by the storm. Sarah woke up on the cafe's worn leather sofa, covered by Eric's coat, his body warming her back in a protective embrace that had lasted all night. They hadn't made love in the complete physical sense, but they had surrendered in other, equally intimate ways, sharing tears, whispering confessions in the dark, touching scars with a reverence that spoke of mutual understanding. There was something sacred in those moments between the candles that were consumed and the sound of rain gradually diminishing. Sarah moved carefully so as not to wake him, observing how sleep had softened the tense lines of his face. Without the dark glasses and gloves, without the armor of coldness he normally wore, Eric looked younger, more vulnerable. She lightly touched one of the scars on his hand, and he stirred, opening blue eyes that immediately sought her out. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep. "Good morning." "The storm has passed." They got up slowly, adjusting wrinkled clothes and trying to return to the real world after the intimacy of the previous night. The daylight revealed the damage left by the storm: fallen branches, huge puddles, some windows of neighboring establishments broken by the wind. "I need to go," Eric said, looking for his glasses. "See if my car is working. Check the other properties I bought." There was something different in his voice, a distance that didn't exist when they were enveloped by darkness and confessions. Sarah felt a pang of anxiety. Was this the typical male reaction of retreat after intimacy, or was there something more? "Eric," she said, touching his arm, "about last night." "It was intense," he interrupted, avoiding her gaze. "Maybe too intense. We were both vulnerable, and the storm—" "No," Sarah said firmly. "Don't do that. Don't diminish what happened between us, as if it were just a reaction to the storm." He finally looked at her, and she saw conflict in his eyes, desire fighting against fear, hope battling self-destructiveness. "Sarah, I can't offer you a happy ending," he said. "I have too much baggage, wounds that will never completely heal. And you deserve more than someone who could collapse at any moment." "Who said I want a traditional happy ending?" she replied. "Who said I don't have my own baggage, my own wounds? Maybe I don't need a Prince Charming. Maybe I need someone who understands what it's like to carry ghosts." Before he could respond, the cafe door opened with the sound of a bell, and Betty entered hurriedly, shaking raindrops from her hair. The older waitress stopped abruptly upon seeing the two together, clearly perceiving the intimacy of the situation. Eric without dark glasses, Sarah with disheveled hair, both wearing wrinkled clothes. "Sorry," Betty said, blushing slightly. "I came to see if the cafe was okay after the storm. I didn't know you were—" "It's all right, Betty," Sarah said quickly. "Eric got stuck here during the storm. You can start preparing the cafe to open." Betty nodded, but Sarah could see the curiosity and concern in her eyes. The woman had worked with the Morgan family for decades. She knew how to read people better than anyone. Eric put his dark glasses back on and headed for the door. "Thank you for the shelter," he said formally, as if they were just owner and customer. "See you later." Sarah watched him leave, feeling a void form in her chest. The transformation had been so quick that it left her dizzy. One minute they were deeply connected. The next he was hiding behind masks again. "Sarah," Betty said softly, approaching. "Are you sure about what you're doing?" "No," Sarah admitted. "But when has any of us ever been sure of anything?" "That man is dangerous," Betty continued. "Not physically, but emotionally. I can see it in his eyes. He's hurt in a way that can hurt others." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened again, and Lisa entered like a personal storm. She wore casual but elegant clothes, designer jeans, and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Her green eyes swept the cafe, registering every detail. "Good morning," she said, addressing Sarah directly. "I came to see how you weathered the storm." There was something in the way she said this that made Sarah suspect Lisa knew exactly how she had weathered the storm. "We weathered it well, thank you," Sarah responded cautiously. "We?" Lisa repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Eric stayed here. All night? Betty moved discreetly behind the counter, but Sarah could feel that she was listening to every word. He was trapped by the storm, Sarah said. Like any decent person would, I offered shelter. How generous of you, Lisa said, but her tone suggested anything but approval. I hope he didn't take advantage of your kindness. What do you mean by that? Lisa moved closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that only Sarah could hear. I mean that Eric has a pattern. He approaches vulnerable women in moments of crisis, offers consolation and protection, and then disappears when they begin to depend on him emotionally. He's done this with at least 3 women I know since Leo's death. The words hit Sarah like slaps, especially because they echoed her own fears about Eric's behavior that morning. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because despite what you might think of me, I'm not a cruel person, and I can see that you're a good woman who has suffered enough. Lisa took an envelope from her pocket. This is the deed to your cafe, transferred back to your name. No conditions, no costs. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. If it were true, it meant she was free. Free from Eric's manipulations. Free from the threat of losing the family legacy. In exchange for what? She asked. In exchange for you staying away from him, completely, letting me take care of Eric the way he needs to be taken care of. And how would that be? Intensive therapy, medication if necessary, a controlled environment where he can heal without harming other people in the process. Lisa paused. Sarah, I love him, have loved him for 20 years. I know all his demons, all his wounds. I know how to help him. And I don't? You've known him for a few weeks. I've known him for a lifetime. Lisa touched Sarah's arm gently. It's not about competition. It's about what's best for everyone involved. Sarah looked at the envelope in her hands, then at Betty, who had stopped pretending she wasn't listening and now observed the conversation with obvious concern. I need to think, Sarah said finally. Of course. But don't take too long. Eric is at a critical point now. After last night, after opening up to you in the way I imagine he did, he's going to have a reaction. And that reaction can be destructive. What kind of reaction? He might try to hurt himself. He might disappear completely. Or he might decide to hurt you before you have a chance to hurt him. Lisa headed for the door. Think about what I said, Sarah, and remember, sometimes loving someone means letting them go. After Lisa left, the cafe was silent except for the noise of the coffee maker Betty had turned on. Sarah sat at one of the tables, the envelope, still in her hands, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. What are you going to do? Betty finally asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. I genuinely don't know. 2 days passed without Eric appearing at the cafe. Sarah tried to maintain a normal routine, but her eyes constantly drifted to the back table, expecting to see him appear with his dark glasses and leather gloves. Lisa's envelope remained stored in the counter drawer, untouched, like a time bomb waiting to explode her life in one way or another. On Thursday morning, Carla arrived earlier than usual, her eyes shining with the kind of excitement that usually meant important gossip. Sarah, you need to see this, she said, waving a local newspaper. There's an article about him. Sarah took the newspaper with nervous hands. The headline in the business section said, Chicago businessman invests millions in Virginia coastal town. Below, there was a photo of Eric at a press conference, formal, and distant as always, alongside an aerial photo of Seabreeze. The article detailed his plans to transform the town into a model community for sustainable development, with investments in infrastructure, ecotourism, and social programs. It mentioned the purchase of multiple commercial and residential properties, as well as plans for a modern marina and a training center for young fishermen. Seems too good to be true, Betty commented, reading over Sarah's shoulder. Rich men don't invest millions in forgotten towns without wanting something in return. Sarah continued reading, looking for details that might reveal Eric's true intentions. At the end of the article, there was a line that made her heart speed. Up, Valentino plans to use Seabreeze as headquarters for a food safety research institute, honoring the memory of his late son, Leo. So he was being sincere about wanting to do the right thing, or at least he was building a public narrative. That supported that version. There's more, Carla said, turning the page, a social column. The second article was more personal, focused on the triumphant return of Lisa Rivers to the business world as a strategic consultant for major companies. There was a photo of her at a social event in Chicago, elegant in a gala dress, smiling. For the cameras. The caption mentioned her renewed engagement with Eric Valentino, scheduled for the end of the year. Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Renewed engagement? Eric hadn't mentioned anything about this when they were together during the storm. When was this published? She asked, checking the date of the newspaper. Yesterday, Carla answered. The social column always comes out on Wednesdays. It meant that Lisa's interview had been given before or shortly after her conversation with Sarah at the cafe. It had been a calculated move, a way to publicly mark territory. The cafe door opened, making the bell ring, and Eric entered. He looked different, more formal than before, wearing a dark suit and tie, the gloves and dark glasses firmly in place. It was as if the 2 days away had allowed him to completely rebuild his defenses. The waitresses quickly dispersed, leaving Sarah alone with him. Eric headed to his usual table but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood, as if making an official visit. Sarah, he said, his voice formal and distant, I need to talk to you. She carefully folded the newspaper, storing it under the counter. I need to talk to you too, she said. About the renewed engagement. Eric visibly stiffened. You saw the social column. I did. Interesting that you didn't mention it when we spent the night together. Because it wasn't relevant at that moment, he said. But there was something in his posture that suggested discomfort. Lisa and I have a complicated history. Sometimes she makes precipitous announcements. So you're not engaged to her? Not officially, not yet. He paused, taking off his glasses and looking directly at her. But perhaps I should be. The brutal honesty of the statement cut deeper than any lie could have cut. Why? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice firm. Because Lisa is right about some things. I am dangerous for people like you. I have the capacity to destroy any good thing I touch. He put his glasses back on, hiding again. What happened between us during the storm was significant, but it can't be repeated. Why not? Because I can't offer you what you deserve. Stability, peace, a future without upheavals. He gestured vaguely around the cafe. You have a good life here, a business that works, employees who respect you, a community that knows you. Why would you risk all of this for someone like me? Maybe because someone like you is exactly what I need, Sarah replied, walking around the counter to approach him. Maybe I'm tired of stability and peace. Maybe I want to feel something again, even if it's complicated. Sarah, no, she interrupted. You don't decide for me what I deserve or what I can handle. I've already lost a son, already had a husband who abandoned me, already cared for a mother in a coma. You think I can't handle a man who has nightmares and scars? Eric was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with himself. There are things about me you don't know, he said finally. Things Lisa knows, and that might make you change your mind. Then tell me. After Leo's death, I had a complete breakdown. I spent 3 months in a psychiatric clinic. I tried to kill myself twice. The words came out in a rapid flow, as if he needed to get rid of them before losing courage. Since then, I take medication for depression and anxiety. Sometimes I have episodes where I can't get out of bed for days. Other times I become obsessed with projects and work 20 hours straight. Sarah absorbed each word, finally seeing the full extent of the wounds he carried. And you think that scares me? She asked. It should scare you. Well, it doesn't. She moved closer until she was close enough to touch his face. What scares me is the idea of you going back to Chicago and marrying a woman who sees you as a project to be fixed instead of a man to be loved. Lisa has known me for 20 years. She knows how to handle me when I'm bad. And I know what it's like to be bad, Sarah said. I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and not want to get out of bed. I know what it's like to feel that your own existence is a betrayal of the memory of those you lost. I don't need 20 years of history to understand pain, Eric. I just need empathy." He closed his eyes, leaning his face against the palm of her hand. "Why don't you give up on me?" he murmured. "Because," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss his forehead, "some people are worth the fight. And because maybe, just maybe, we can fix each other in a way we could never do alone." When he kissed her this time, it was different from the first time. Less desperate, more determined, as if he were making an important decision, committing to something that frightened him, but that he could no longer deny. "If we do this," he said against her lips, "Lisa won't accept it easily." "Then we'll have to deal with Lisa," Sarah replied. "Together." Outside the cafe, hidden behind a parked car, Lisa observed the scene through the window, her face a mask of cold anger. She took the cell phone from her pocket and made a call. "It's Lisa," she said when someone answered. "I need you to expedite those documents we discussed. Yes, all of them. And I want it to be today." The bomb exploded on a sunny Friday, exactly 1 week after the storm that had changed everything between Sarah and Eric. They had spent the last few days building something fragile but real. He appeared at the cafe every morning, no longer as the mysterious customer at the back table, but as a man trying to learn to be vulnerable again. They talked about plans for Seabreeze, about the Research Institute, about ways to honor the memories of Leo and Michael without being consumed by them. Sarah had begun to believe that perhaps it was possible that two such damaged people could find a way to heal together. Until the process server appeared. It was noon when he entered the cafe, a short, bald man carrying a worn leather briefcase. Betty directed him to Sarah, who was organizing stock behind the counter. "Ms. Sarah Morgan?" he asked, taking documents. "From the briefcase." "That's me. I have a court summons to deliver to you. You are being sued for defamation, misappropriation of property, and interference in legitimate business." Sarah took the papers with trembling hands. The documents were extensive, full of complex legal language, but the essence was clear. Lisa was claiming that Sarah had used privileged information obtained through her mother's documents to blackmail Eric and force him to illegally transfer properties to her. "This is absurd," Sarah said, flipping through the pages. "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for Monday morning in Norfolk," the officer continued. "You need to appear with legal representation, or the process will continue in your absence." After he left, Sarah sat in one of the cafe chairs, the documents spread on the table in front of her. The accusations were detailed and specific, clearly prepared by someone who intimately knew all aspects of the situation. There were references to conversations that only Eric could have reported, details about the documents found in the attic, even mentions of the time they had spent together during the storm. "My God," Betty murmured, reading. Over her shoulder, "That woman is trying to destroy you." "She's trying to keep me away from him," Sarah corrected, the reality of the situation beginning to form. "And she's using the law to do it." The cafe door opened and Eric entered hurriedly. Clearly agitated, he had received copies of the same documents. "Sarah, I didn't know," were his first words. "I swear by everything sacred, I didn't know she was going to do this." "You didn't know?" Sarah stood up, the papers in hand. "These accusations include details that only you could have provided. Conversations between us, things that happened during the storm. Lisa has investigative attorneys. They could have gotten information from other sources." "What other sources, Eric? Who else knew about my mother's documents? Who else was here the night of the storm?" He was silent, the weight of the implication falling on both of them. Somehow Lisa had obtained detailed information about everything that had happened between them, and the only possible source was Eric himself. "You talked to her," Sarah said, no longer a question. "After that night, you told her everything." "It wasn't like that," Eric protested, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. She has ways of getting information, and You what?" "I was confused, scared by what I was feeling for you. I sought out Lisa to talk to try to understand what was happening to me. And in the process, you gave her all the ammunition she needed to destroy me. Sarah threw the documents on the table. Congratulations, Eric. Your ex-fiancée now has everything she needs to sue me until I lose everything I have. I'll resolve this, he said, approaching her. I'll talk to my lawyers. I'll make Lisa withdraw the accusations. No, Sarah interrupted, backing away when he tried to touch her. You don't understand. It's already too late. She orchestrated this perfectly. Even if she withdraws the accusations, the seed of doubt has been planted. Everyone will think I used you, that I manipulated the situation. People who know you wouldn't do that. People who know me also know I was desperate to save the cafe, and now it looks like I used information from my dead mother to blackmail a rich man. Sarah laughed bitterly. She's brilliant. I have to admit, she found a way to destroy me that also saves you. You come out as the innocent victim, I come out as the manipulative villain. Eric looked genuinely distressed, running his hands through his hair. Sarah, please. Let me fix this. How? How are you going to fix the fact that you don't trust me enough to keep our secrets? How are you going to fix the fact that you ran to your ex-fiancée at the first emotional difficulty? I trust you. No, you don't. If you trusted me, you would have talked to me about your doubts instead of going to Lisa. Sarah picked up the documents from the table. You know what's saddest? I really believed we could work. I really thought two wounded people could help each other heal. We still can. No, we can't. Because in the end, you'll always run to Lisa when things get difficult. She's known you for 20 years, remember? She knows how to handle you. Sarah headed for the back door. Maybe she's right. Maybe you really do deserve each other. Sarah, don't leave like this. I'm not leaving, she said, stopping at the door. I'm just accepting reality. You made your choice the moment you decided to trust Lisa instead of trusting me. She went up to the small apartment she maintained above the cafe, leaving Eric alone in the room with Betty, who had observed the entire discussion in silence. The older waitress approached him, and for the first time since they had known each other, her eyes carried no fear or deference. She's right, you know, Betty said calmly. You betrayed her. Maybe not intentionally, but you betrayed her nonetheless. I didn't want this to happen, Eric murmured, but it happened. And now you need to decide what's more important to you, staying in your comfort zone with a woman who manipulates you, or fighting for a woman who accepts you. Betty began cleaning the tables, an automatic gesture she had been doing for decades. Because let me tell you something about Sarah Morgan. She's already suffered enough in her life. If you can't protect her, at least don't be another source of pain. Eric stood in the center of the empty cafe, surrounded by the evidence of a simple but meaningful life that he had helped destroy. Through the window he could see Lisa approaching, walking with the confidence of someone who had just won an important battle. When she entered, her smile was triumphant, but not cruel. Eric, she said softly, I came to get you. It's time for us to go home. Home, he repeated, the word sounding strange in his mouth. Chicago, where you belong, where I can take care of you properly. She approached, touching his arm gently. I know you think you care about her, but this is just emotional confusion, misdirected guilt. When we get back home, away from all these influences, you'll see things more clearly. Eric looked at the stairs that led to Sarah's apartment. Then, at Lisa, and the accusations against her. They'll be withdrawn as soon as we're back in Chicago, as long as she doesn't try to contact you again. Lisa smiled. See? I can be reasonable when I need to be. You orchestrated all of this. I orchestrated our salvation. Yours and mine. She placed her hand on his chest. Eric, you're sick. Not completely healed from the trauma. You're confusing gratitude and guilt with love. Let me take you home and help you get well again. Upstairs, Sarah watched through the window, seeing Eric hesitate between two women. Two futures, two versions of himself. She knew with a certainty that hurt in her chest which choice he would make. 6 months had passed since Eric left with Lisa on a sunny September morning, leaving Seabreeze and Sarah behind like painful chapters that needed to be forgotten. The legal accusations were withdrawn a week later, exactly as Lisa had promised, but the emotional damage remained long after the legal documents were filed away. Sarah had immersed herself in work as a way to survive. The Blue Dawn Cafe continued to function, but she had made changes. She expanded the menu, hired a new waitress to replace Carla, who had moved to Norfolk, and began offering regional cooking classes on Thursday nights. Life went on, as it always does, but there was a different quality to her routine now. More determined, more focused, as if she had finally accepted that some wounds never completely heal, just transform into scars that become part of who we are. It was a March afternoon, the cafe almost empty, except for some tourists having acai on the porch when Betty approached her carrying a letter. "It arrived today," she said, placing the envelope in Sarah's hand. "No return address, but I recognized the handwriting." Sarah looked at the envelope, feeling her heart speed up slightly. The writing was unmistakably Eric's. She had seen enough samples in his notebooks to recognize the angular and precise handwriting. "Do you want me to stay?" Betty asked gently. "No, it's fine, I can handle this." Sarah went up to her apartment and sat at the small table near the window that faced the sea. Her hands trembled slightly when she tore open the envelope and removed 3 sheets of paper, covered with the familiar handwriting. "Dear Sarah," the letter began, "I know I have no right to write to you after everything that happened, but there are things I need to say, words I should have spoken before I left." She took a deep breath and continued reading. "You were right about everything. I ran to Lisa because it was easier than facing what I felt for you. It was safer to return to known patterns than to risk something new and frightening. I spent so much time hiding behind guilt and self-destruction that I forgot what it's like to truly live. These last months in Chicago have been enlightening in ways I didn't expect. Lisa took care of me exactly as she promised, medicated me, monitored me, protected me from any stimulus that might disturb my recovery. But in the process, I realized that what she calls love is actually a sophisticated form of control. She doesn't love me for who I am, but for what she can transform me into. You loved me for my flaws, for my scars, for my baggage. You saw a broken man and didn't try to fix me. You tried to accept me, and I was too stupid, too cowardly to recognize what a gift that was. I broke off the engagement with Lisa last week. It was intense. She didn't take it well, as you can imagine. She threatened to renew the legal accusations against you, but my lawyers assured that would be impossible now. She no longer has power over either of us. I'm coming back to Seabreeze, Sarah. Not because I expect you to forgive me or accept me back, but because I need to fulfill the promises I made. The Food Safety Research Institute will be built, exactly as planned. The investments in the town's infrastructure will continue. I need to do these things not to impress you or to obtain your forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to. As is for us, I don't know if there still is an us. I know I broke your trust in a way that might be irreparable, but I also know that what we felt for each other during that storm was real. It was frightening and complicated and imperfect, but it was real. If you can forgive me, if there's a chance to start over, I would like to try again. This time without secrets, without running to ex-fiancés, without cowardice. I want to try to be the man you saw in me that night. If you can't forgive me, I understand, but I'll stay in Seabreeze anyway. This town has become my home in a way Chicago never was, and maybe eventually we can at least be cordial neighbors who greet each other on the street. There's one last thing I need to tell you. I found more letters from your mother in the distributor's archives. Letters I never received at the time, intercepted by subordinates who wanted to avoid problems. In these letters, she talked about you, about how proud she was of the strong woman you had become, about how she admired your determination after Michael's death. She knew you would be able to handle any challenge life put in your path. She was right. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. With all my love and regret, Eric P.S. I left a surprise in the cafe's attic. Betty has the keys. Sarah carefully folded the letter, tears blurring her vision. There were so many emotions competing in her chest, residual anger at the betrayal, longing for the intimate moments they had shared, cautious hope that perhaps there might be a second chance. She ran down the stairs and found Betty at the counter. "The keys to the attic," she said without preamble. Betty smiled, taking a set of keys from her apron. "He was here yesterday in the early morning. He wanted to make sure it would be a surprise." Sarah went up to the attic with her heart beating strongly. The light was on, and in the center of the space there was something that made her stop and put her hand to her mouth. It was a small memorial, a beautiful wooden table with 2 framed photographs, one of Leo, a handsome boy with dark hair and a mischievous smile, and another of Michael, which Eric had somehow managed to get from her personal belongings. Between the photos, there was a small bronze plaque that said, "For all the children who left too soon, and for the parents who learned to live with their absence." Next to the memorial, there was a carved wooden box. Inside, Sarah found the original property documents of the cafe, transferred back to her name, as well as a folder with detailed architectural projects for renovations and improvements to the building, all paid for and planned. There was also a small blue velvet box. Inside, a simple white gold ring with a small blue sapphire, not an engagement ring but something more subtle, a promise perhaps, a possibility. Sarah went down the stairs slowly, the ring in hand, and found Betty waiting anxiously. "Well?" the waitress asked. "Well," Sarah repeated, looking through the window to the street where, for the first time in months, she saw a familiar figure walking toward the cafe. Eric, without dark glasses, without gloves, carrying only a backpack and an expression of nervous hope. "Well, I think some people deserve a second chance," Sarah said, putting the ring in her pocket and walking toward the door. When Eric entered, at the cafe the bell rang as it always did, but this time the sound seemed different, more like a beginning than an ending. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she responded. Can I sit? Maybe order a coffee?" Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she had given in months. "Sure, but just so you know, arrogance still costs double the tip." Eric laughed, and the sound filled the cafe like music. "Some things never change," he said. "No," Sarah agreed, discreetly touching the ring in her pocket. "But some people can change, if they want it enough." Outside, the ocean waves continued their eternal dance against the coast of Seabreeze, but inside the Blue Dawn Cafe, 2 wounded people were beginning, again, the slow and careful process of learning to trust, to love, and to heal together. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more storms, more challenges, more moments of doubt, but for the first time in a long time, both believed they could face anything, as long as they faced it together. And perhaps, thought Sarah, as she served coffee to the man she had learned to love despite everything, perhaps that was exactly how the best love stories worked, not like perfect fairy